So in this lesson, we'll be looking into three built-in JavaScript objects: math, string, and date. Okay. There are lots of built-in JavaScript objects, but these three are the most used ones, and they are worth exploring in this course. So math is a built-in object that has properties and methods for mathematical constants and functions. Okay. So math is not a constructor. Okay. So we don't use math with the new keyword. All properties and methods of math are static, and we do not need to use the new keyword for math. Simple. So for example, um, a couple of static methods like math.floor. Let me copy it and let me paste it. So friends, math.floor, okay, basically gives us the nearest integer, the smallest nearest integer. Okay, to be very, very technical. So two integers are the closest integers to 45.95. One is 45, another is 46, right? If you were to tell two closest, okay, two closest integers to 45.95, one is 45 and another is 46. So math.floor gives you the smallest nearest integer, which is going to be 45. Even if it's a very, very, after dot, we have like 9995, even though we have, but we will get back 45. Okay. Let me use the Quokka extension for this. Okay. Let me log it. And we can see that we get back 45. Okay. Math.ceiling. Okay. Again, you have two integers. Those are nearest to 7.4. One is 7 and another is 8. Math.ceiling will give you the top one, the larger one of the two. So out of 7 and 8, it will give us 8. Even if it's a very, very small number after integer, it will give us the ceiling. It will give us the largest nearest integer. So similarly, we have math.max. So we can pass in a couple of numbers and it will give us back the largest number. We can use math.min and it will give us back the smallest number. Okay. So similarly, there are lots of very useful methods related to mathematical calculations, and I provided a link to the documentation. There are also some, constants. For example, pi. Okay. So you don't need to remember pi if you're using JavaScript. What you can do is you can simply log math.pi. So this is a constant and you will get back the pi. Okay. And you can use math.pi anywhere in your code, JavaScript code, whenever you need pi. Okay. So pi is a constant, static constant, and these are static methods or functions. Okay, so several very important constants and functions related to mathematical calculations. You have this math object. Okay, so this is something to be aware of. This is something every good JavaScript developer must be aware of. Okay. The next is string. Okay. So the string object is used to represent and manipulate a sequence of characters. String can be created as primitives from string literals, from objects, or using the string constructor. What does this mean? Okay. So basically, we can create a string using quotes. For example, this is a string. Okay. We can use string using the string constructor function. So we can do something like string and pass in something. We can construct a string using the string constructor function. So we have a new string, which is a new string. Okay. So there are several ways to construct a string. Okay. And just like uh, just like math, it has several very useful utilities. Okay, so we can get string.length, we can get a particular character from a string, we can check if the string includes a set of characters, if a string starts with something, if a string ends with something. The index of gives us the index of this set of characters. We can replace, okay, we don't need regex to replace some simple set of characters with another set of character. We can convert that to them to uppercase, we can convert them to lowercase, we can trim the white spaces, we can split based on some pattern. For example, suppose I have a string, okay, let str1 is equal to math, science, and geography. For example, this is a string. I want to get each of the comma separated value as an item of an array. So I can iterate over it. Okay. So what I can do is I can just do str1.split, and I want to split at every comma and a space. So I get back an array with maths, science, and geography. Okay. So again, just like date, we have several utilities. One thing I think every JavaScript developer should be aware of is escape notations. Okay. So a couple of useful escape notations. For example, do I have an example that I can readily use? Yeah. So I'll just copy this. So what if I want to include a quote, a single quote inside a string? For example, I want to write hello Vivek, but Vivek should be wrapped with a quote. But we have also used the single quote here at the beginning of the string. Okay. So for that, you have to escape it using a backslash. Okay. So you have to say that we are not closing this quote, but we are literally escaping the quote. Okay. Whenever we want to. So here you can see that whenever we want to insert a single quote, we can escape that using a backslash. Similarly for double quotes and a slash. Okay. So this is a way of escaping quotes. Okay. Now for a new line. So if I want a new line character here, so I can use the new line escape notation with backslash n. Okay. So these are, useful escape sequences. Okay. for different things. So when you see these kind of string, okay, so don't be scared. Just look at this reference and you will get an idea what they stand for. They are not as scary as they look. But friends, there is a much better way, you know, to handle the same thing. Okay. So what we can do is instead use template literals. Okay. So what template literals are? They are backticks. So here, let me stop Coca. Yeah. So here you will see that it is giving me the exact same thing, but didn't had to, write any of these scary things. So what we did is we used backtick. So backtick is aware of new line characters. So if I want another new line character, I can very easily, do that just by literally giving it a new line. I don't have to write a new line escape notation. Okay. I can use single quotes and double quotes wherever required inside the backtick. So we can see that Vivek has a single quote, balance has a double quote. Third, for variables. Okay, so name is a variable. It's a dynamic value. It's a computed value. So we can use dollar and curly brackets. And inside this, we can write any JavaScript. Okay, so I can write any JavaScript expression inside this. So I can write 3 plus 2. Okay, so this is a JavaScript expression and I get 5 here. I can write a ternary operator here. So this will evaluate. Any expression will be evaluated dynamically. So I can write if true, then Vivek, else someone else. And I'll get back Vivek here because it's true. And if it's a false, I'll get back someone else. Okay. So this is template literal where we use the backtick. Okay. This is just above tab in most of the keyboards and left to the number, the exclamation mark in the keyboard just below the escape. Okay. And we can just start typing pure English here and it will take care of these new line characters. And also it's super duper easy to insert JavaScript in between the string or the text content. So this is called a template literal. Okay. So this is an amazing way to construct string values. Okay. And this is used a lot in React. So better get comfortable with it. Do a little bit of practice. Create a couple of variables and try to form a string and log it and use those variables inside them until you get comfortable with it. Okay. So this, and wherever you can, instead of interpolating using plus, you should be using a backtick. Okay. That's a common best practice these days. So this was the string object. Now the date constructor. Okay. Again, we have great documentations for date. If you go through the entire documentation, I don't think you'll remember anything when you will actually be using date. So the best is to know that this exists. Okay. Then I have a code pen. Okay. So in which you can experiment with it. You can try out different things. For example, for the current date. Okay. So you can store the current date in the now variable using the new date. Okay. If you don't pass in anything to date, you get the current date and time. And this new date object can be displayed in different formats like to date string, to time string, to ISO string and whatnot. So there are different ways of built-in ways of displaying date. So this documentation is something that you should be comfortable with. Okay. So there are different date formats. There is a date constructor. We have a couple of static methods. Okay, we have some instant methods. For example, from a date object, we can get seconds, we can get time, we can get minutes, we can get month. Okay, you don't need to remember any of these. You should be aware that we have a nice documentation at MDN. Okay, and we have these static and instance, you know, uh, methods. So very useful. And there are lots of examples here. One thing I do want to bring to your notice is this timestamps. Okay, so we have Unix timestamps, we have RFC2822 timestamps. So basically these help us in formatting our date. Okay, so we can pass in timestamps and they help us in forming, in displaying the date in a format that we need. And these are obviously not the most user-friendly documentations, right? So the much better documentation is of CSS Tricks, a very useful blog which I have bookmarked and I find myself returning to it again and again. I have also linked it here. So here, this is my sort of documentation which I reach out to often. So it's worth going through. So there are like 4 ways of creating date with the date constructor using date string, which is not a good way, which is a really bad way. Date arguments, which is the best way, in my opinion, to create dates with a timestamp with no arguments. Okay, so let's look at them. So with the date string, you may pass in, actually, you should pass in date and time. Okay, so you should pass in something like this. So it should be having a year dash month dash date. Then for time t, by default you can give 00.00, but you should give a time. Okay, so else it causes lots of it converts that to UTC, and if you are behind GMT, then it subtracts the day by 1. To avoid all of these complexities, if you don't have the time, just keep it 00, but do provide hour and minute. So this is one way, and not a very recommended way of creating date, but you will see a lot of code creating date this way. Okay, this is by creating dates by using date strings. The best way, in my opinion, is to use arguments. Okay, so you can pass up to 7 arguments to create date and time, year, okay, then month, day, hour, minutes, and seconds. Okay, milliseconds is optional. And it's one of the most reliable way. However, one thing to remember is that month values are 0 indexed in JavaScript. So January is equal to 0 and March is equal to 2. Okay, so you need to remember this. And yeah, so another way is using timestamps. So timestamps means, the amount of milliseconds elapsed since 1st January 1970. So this using timestamps is another thing. And with no arguments, we have already seen that date gives us the current time in local time. Okay. So to summarize, creating dates, we are talking about creating dates now. You can create date with the new date. There are 4 possible syntaxes. Date string, not recommended. With arguments, the best way in my experience. Timestamp, and with no arguments. Okay. Now formatting a date. So there is no straightforward way to format a date. Okay. But okay, so we have like 7 methods. So we have toString, which gives us back date in this format. We have to date string, which gives us back in this format. To local string gives back this format. To local date string gives us date back in this format. To GMT string, to UTC string, to ISO string, but none of these are really very practical. So we usually write our custom date format. I at least end up either using a third-party library like date functions, or I write my own custom date format. And I do that using a combination of 4 methods. So I can get full year. I can use the dot get full year, which gives me 4-digit year according to the local time. I can get month. Okay, this gives me month of the year. Okay, I can get the date. Okay, which is in the range of 1 to 31, and I can get the day of the week, which is 0 to 6. Again, this is 0 indexed. And when I have these values, nothing is stopping me to write my function which can give me my date in the format I want, right? So it's very easy. In most of the cases where we need to just display our date in some custom format, uh, taking help of these instance methods, we can very easily create our own format, right? So for example, we can write a simple object or a map which maps to these numbers to the month, or to maybe month in numbers. Okay, and then we can have these map to the weekdays, and we can use this the way you know required. So there are lots of nice examples here in this article, and yes, they have used object, and they this is impressive. This is a really good article. It's almost my it's like a documentation that I keep returning back to. So this is how we use dates in JavaScript. And one of the best resources, in my opinion, which I use all the time, is this CSS Tricks article. And I always use arguments inside the date to get a date. And then I use these instance methods to construct or format a date. Okay, so we have learned about 4 different built-in objects: date and string and math. Okay, there are some other objects as well, but for now, for sake of this course, these three objects, learning these 3 objects are more than enough for us. Okay.